This is the Field of 12 After Dark Big Ten preview show. Got my guy Christian Hackenberg, who's Big Ten Freshman of the Year, played some years in the NFL. My guy Jake Butt, who is an All-American tight end at Michigan. I am just Joshua Perry. I was known as a nice guy. Made a few tackles in my time at Ohio State as we won a national championship. But fellas, football season's right upon us. How are we feeling?
Feeling good, man. Josh, I am, I've been in a whirlwind of traveling right now. We're all on Zoom. So behind the computer is a bunch of boxes. So for me, it's kind of like my football season. The guys that are in camp, they've had their head down. They don't know what day of the week it is. They've just been grinding. Soon they're going to come up for air. That's kind of what I'm doing this weekend. I'll be your neighbor in Chicago at the end of the weekend. That's when I'll come up for air. But I'm in that camp mindset right now myself.
Pack, how's it going?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say the same. I think I'm just happy to be back, Josh. Bouncing off a good year last year and, plugging away. And I think we got some good stuff for the folks listening tonight.
No, I'm definitely glad that we're all here. This is actually a really good group of people. We're all under 30. We were all pretty good players here in the Big Ten as we preview the season. Again, the Field of 12 After Dark presented by Bet Rivers. But we got a lot to get into. We're going to talk some Ohio State. A lot of people think that is national title or bust in Columbus. We'll give you our thoughts on that. We'll talk Michigan, and we got a Michigan guy on the show in Jake Butt, so he'll give us some insight into that program. The reigning Big Ten champs also made it to the college football playoff for the first time in program history. Also, some sleepers in the league. And tell you what, I think that the East, we kind of know who's going to shine there. Might be a couple of teams that are on the rise, but the West right now, I'm telling you, a lot of parity. So we'll dive into that, and we got a lot more coming up. But let's get started with the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, again, a team that I talked about that could be a college football playoff team, could win a national title this year. And it starts with the quarterback position. Of course, we know C.J. Stroud is going to be back, went for over 4,400 yards and 44 touchdowns a year ago. He's going to be throwing to Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's another great player. We know that by his Rose Bowl performance. He led the Ohio State receivers last year in yards with 1,606, 9 touchdowns on top of that. You got Travion Henderson in the backfield. From the offensive standpoint, and that's your side of the ball, guys, so I'm going to let you dive right into it. When you look at the collection of talent that Ohio State has, when you look at the returning production that's going to be coming from some of these really good skill players, I mean, is this going to be the best offense in college football?
I certainly think it can be. And it felt like that was the case last year. Of course, you lose Garrett Wilson, you lose Olave to the NFL draft. But what Ryan Day and Coach Brian Hartline have done there is it feels like when someone would go down, another NFL, they're kind of cut from the same mold. They just have NFL guys on the sideline. And it's recruiting the talent, but then Coach Hartline has done a good job of developing the talent. And the scheme has allowed the talent to showcase their full abilities. Jackson Smith-Njigba, I would say, is my favorite to be the best receiver in the country this year. He could do it from the slot. He could do it outside. He could do it running underneath shallow routes and choice routes, and he could go down the field and make plays. And then, of course, they got Marvin Harrison Jr., a guy who, he made the freaks list this year as a guy that could be one of the best athletes in the country. Travion Henderson to round it all out. I have no concerns and no worries about the Buckeye offense this year. Hack, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Josh, we've talked about it a lot. I think Ohio State's one of those few programs that has done a very good job of keeping a standard of earn what you get, next man up mentality, come in, work. And they've been able to keep that talent in the building, especially with the transfer portal and the NIL and all these things coming up to the surface. I think they've done a fantastic job of that, and that's a testament to it. Even though Wilson and Olave are gone, to your point, Jake, they're going to reload. I thought they were 7 deep last year, guys that could be 1 or 2 across the entire conference. So really excited for that. And I think CJ Stroud, his performance speaks for itself. Even the games they lost last year, he played spectacular in most of them. Tough to throw for 400 yards against an Oregon team and lose, and he did that over and over again. So I think that defense has really done a good job of shoring up. I thought they figured some things out towards the end of the year last year, got a little bit more reps under their belt. And I think that that's going to be a big part of it. But ultimately, I think this team's geared up and ready to go. And it's been that way for quite some time now. And I think that's just a testament to how Ryan Day has taken over Urban's program and kept a consistent standard of excellence in the building.
Yeah, I'll get to the defensive side of the ball here in a sec, but just talking about those wide receivers and Jake, you mentioned Jackson and what he provides just from a skill standpoint. And you talked to the guys last year and you asked them about who was the best wide receiver just in terms of athletic ability. And they all said Jackson Smith and Jigba, which is crazy considering the guys that they had. But I agree with you. He is effective in every level of the football field. And especially when he gets out in the open field, he's such a nimble athlete that he's a glider. He doesn't look like he's really moving that fast, but he's eating up a lot of yards as he goes. So it'll be a different adjustment for him to be the feature, the number one wide receiver. But we saw what he could do last year just in terms of his ability to rack up yards. But Marvin Harrison Jr. becomes a really interesting one to me. And I've had a chance to watch most of the teams in the Big Ten practice up to this point. With my work on the Big Ten Network. And Jake, you're going to be a part of the crew this year. Really excited about seeing what you're going to do there because I know you're going to be great. But Marvin is a guy who is a long wide receiver, but you start to look at his proportions and the dude has an extremely long torso. So when you start to get into the sports science of movement skills, he has a lower center of gravity. And so a lot of times when wide receivers are getting in and out of breaks, they're taught to sink their center of gravity because you can turn a lot better like that. I was a high lever guy, could not turn. That was one of the things I got knocked on the draft. That's why I wasn't a great player. But he's a guy who proportionally, he has shorter legs for somebody of his height. And I think that works out to his advantage because you watch how crisp he is getting in and out of routes, got really good ankle flexion. It's a wild thing to watch. This running back room, and we'll get to one of the injuries that happened with Ohio State's running back room later on. Travion Henderson, though, came in as a freshman, got a ton of carries, probably needed a little bit more help on that offensive line. I know that was a big point of emphasis. They made a coaching change and brought in Justin Fry from UCLA to coach up that offensive line group. This is a guy right now who I look at, and not only does his running ability stand out, but he was a weapon out of the backfield, and I think they could do that a little bit more. But then you've got a guy in Mayan Williams who actually averaged more yards per carry than Travion Henderson did last year. And I think that 1-2 punch is going to be really important for this Ohio State team. We know that they're going to be able to throw the football. That's not a question. You've got probably the best returning quarterback. You can make a case for Bryce Young down there at Alabama. But the fact of the matter is you can't be one-dimensional. And so for me, offensive success for Ohio State looks more like balance. Last year, they weren't as balanced as you would want to see them. When you have those types of players at the running back position, you got to use them in a way that's really effective. We saw what Michigan did with the run game. We see what Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota like to do in the run game. And I think Ohio State can display that type of toughness when they need to as well.
Josh, I want to go back to something you said real briefly because you're making a few good points, but the lower center of gravity, actually, it's a funny story. When, after we had two head coaches there, Vance Joseph was our first head coach, and that came with the strength coach. Well, then when Vic Fangio came in, they brought in Lauren Landau as the strength coach. And the details that go into football, Landau, he shakes my hand. It doesn't say anything to me. He kind of looks me up and down, and he's studying me. He's like, short legs, long torso. He's like, yeah, you got good area, short area quickness. So it's funny that you say that, man. I think the same thing, that lower center of gravity really helps you in terms of your ability to run routes. But you bring up another good point about using the running backs. And a lot of people talk about Travion Henderson's talent. And I think he is extremely talented, but you have to understand what Ohio State wants to do. And I say they're going to lean much more heavily towards passing the ball. There's going to be more games where they air it out 45, 50 plus times than they do turn around and give off 30 carries. Now, this shouldn't matter for their offense as much because their offense is going to put up points against anybody. But from an identity standpoint, as you're going through spring and camp, and as you look at the defense, the defense needed to step up from a physicality aspect. They kind of got pushed around by Michigan last year.
They did.
But when you're going through camp in spring, you're going against your offensive identity, against your defensive identity. So when you're a pass-happy offense, it's less opportunities to emphasize the physicality needed to have a violent front seven. So that's something, and you were able to watch them at practice this past week as you've done your tour with the Big Ten. But if you're going against a pass-happy offense all camp, where's the opportunity to emphasize a violent front seven that's going to say, hey, we're going to plug the holes and we're not going to let Michigan run all over us again?
Yeah, I mean, they went with a heavy 9-on-7 period in practice, which I was glad to see. But I totally agree with that standpoint. Just as a guy who played on the defensive side of the ball, in this day and age, you have to be able to run and hit, and it's important to get the reps on angles and how the ball travels through the air, different route combinations you're going to see it against the different coverages that you like to run. But I mean, when you break down football just to a fundamental standpoint, run the ball, right? Like that's the thing that we all grew up on. That's why we came to play in the Big Ten, most of us, is because we appreciate that brand of football. And so I definitely agree with that. I think that it was probably a point of emphasis during spring. I certainly saw it in training camp, but you're right. Like, and this is not a knock on Ryan Day, but he's a former quarterback. I think he calls the game like a quarterback. He likes to pass, and I understand because you got a great quarterback and some great receivers. But that run game in the reps that you get in practice are totally pivotal. Hack, I wanted to ask this question to you because I love getting into this, and we spent some time last year talking about quarterbacks and mechanics and what makes a quarterback great. When you flip on the tape of CJ Stroud and you watch him compared to other quarterbacks, not only in the Big Ten, but nationally, what do you see out of his game that has made him so effective?
I think last year it was great seeing his maturation process. He really had some opportunities in the spotlight early, especially that Oregon game. And you really saw him take advantage of those opportunities. Now, it didn't necessarily work out in his favor. And again, we've beat a dead horse with that. There were a lot of factors that went into that. But I think obviously the frame, going back to kind of the comment that you guys were talking about, I think he can sustain at his size. I think he can make any type of throw that you need to make. And I think Ryan Day does a great job of, although there's going to be lots of opportunities for them to play matchup football because of the talent they have outside, he still does force some type of progression game into their philosophy offensively from a passing standpoint. And you even saw that with Justin Fields. That was one of the knocks they talked about, but Justin Fields did the same thing. You saw him getting to 2, 3, and 4 a lot of times on tape. So I think CJ's done a great job of that. And really, I just look for that kid to stay healthy, continue to do what he's been doing, grow, learn from a guy like Ryan Day who has NFL experience, and continue to show what he can do. And he's to me, he's one of the top 3 guys in the country, and they're all interchangeable at this point for me.
Heck, I'm kind of curious from a quarterback standpoint, and kind of putting yourself into CJ Stroud's shoes to go back on the emphasis of running the ball is I'd imagine CJ Stroud feels confident. He would probably want to throw the ball 100% of the time because he feels that confident in his ability to make his reads and hit his receivers, and he feels confident in the massive wealth of talent he has at the receiver position that they can air it out for 700 yards if they had to in a game. But from a quarterback's perspective, does it ever go through your mind that, hey, we need to emphasize physicality, which means, hey, coach, let's mix in a couple extra runs throughout practice and throughout camp just to form that identity and touch it throughout camp?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been something that Ohio State's done. Maybe last year it didn't look that way, but the ability to finish games and turn around and hand the football off, and then even earlier on in the games, if you can set the standard early and be in those second and manageables, which will then put you in those third and manageables and staying on schedule that everybody talks about, it's a huge part of the game. And Josh, you talked about it. If you can turn around and hand the ball off for 3.5 yards every time, you're going to win the football game. You're going to own the time of possession, and you're going to keep moving the sticks. So Ohio State's always had that. I think, the game situations last year took it out of them. A lot of times they were trying to go match for match, play from behind. And to your point, Josh, as a quarterback, you're thinking of ways how to create explosives, especially when you got all those toys outside. I mean, you got a bunch of Ferraris running around out there. You're going to figure out ways to create explosives in a sexy manner, as opposed to just turn around and hand it off. I think Day is going to do a great job this year of understanding what his team's built like. I think Travion got another young guy, some really good reps last year. And I think they're going to use that in their favor much more. I think Ryan Day is too good of a football coach to overlook that.
I certainly agree with that. Before we get off of Ohio State, I want to talk about this defense real quick, because last year it certainly did not meet standards for what Ohio State wanted to be. You look at some of the bigger games that they played in against Utah in the Rose Bowl, even though they cleaned some things up, they gave up a lot of points, over 5 yards per carry in the run game. And then against Oregon and Michigan, each they gave up over 7 yards per carry in the run game. Again, going back to that physicality, certainly something you don't want to make habit of. And they made a big change on the defensive side of the ball. The only remaining coach from last year's staff is Larry Johnson, the defensive line coach, who's done a pretty good job there. But they bring in Jim Knowles, who coached a top 5 defense at Oklahoma State. And he's a guy who's made it clear that he was able to do that with three and below star players on that defense. Now he's working with some 4 and 5 stars. I don't know how much you guys have really gotten into the tape on what Jim Knowles likes to do. It is extremely chaotic. You don't know where the safeties are coming from. You don't know if the linebackers are going to be running through gaps. You don't know where that extra rusher is coming in the pass game. And I certainly like the aggression of it. But one thing that I have taken away from that defense is that it's so risky that it leaves you exposed for explosive
a lot of risk
plays
reward.
as well. Yeah, I mean, they cut guys loose in the back end and just you hope that you hit the quarterback or you confuse him to the point where he can't find the open guy. I'm expecting a lot of improvement out of this Ohio State defense. I think it really cuts some great athletes loose. At the same time, I think that starting off with Notre Dame is probably tough because there is a learning curve. And I've gone through those defensive changes where you go from one system to another, and it takes a little bit of time in real game action to get it flowing. If Ohio State can put together a defense and Ryan Day said he expects top 10, Jim Knowles says he wants top 5. Not exactly sure they're going to get there this year, but let's say it's a top 20 or top 30 defense. Is that enough to get Ohio State over the hill and potentially win a national title?
I kind of want to touch on something real quick though about Josh Knowles. Josh, and top 30, top 20. I don't know that they win a national title with that level of defense. They need to probably have a top 10, top 5, because, that's what Bama's expectations are. Even though Georgia lost a lot of ball players, they're reloading real quickly. And Jim Knowles did have that at Oklahoma State, but you mentioned the complexity of the defense. And understanding college is you have a limited amount of hours in the week to install this. Well, you have to go back and look at the totality of his time at Oklahoma State. They weren't top 5. They built to that over the years.
Certainly
so
did.
Those installations build up with a limited time scale in college. So now he's 4 or 5 years of installing this system. There's veteran players that are able to play much faster within the scheme. If it's a complex system, it's hard to get up to full speed right away, and you can get gashed. They have the talent on offense, but how quickly can he teach these guys his system so they avoid the big mistake in the big games? And he's going to need to do it quickly because he's got Notre Dame, a highly ranked team, right away. But if they want to win the national title, I think they can get to the college football playoff. But if they want to win the title, they do need a top 10 at a minimum and probably a top 5 defense.
Hack, what do you think?
Here's the funny thing. I think they're returning 8 starters on defense. They had a lot of guys play. And that was one thing that I talked about with you last year is the youth on that side of the ball. They've always had a couple marquee guys. And I think last year they really didn't have that marquee. This guy, they had 2 or 3 guys who were locked top 10 draft picks. I don't think they really had that last year, but what they did have is a lot of young guys get a lot of experience. And to your point, Jake, I think the change in schemes, one thing, and something we were talking about right before we got on here is about a coach's conviction versus their ability to learn and adjust, right? And I think there's enough heads in that building who've been around the game a long enough time where you have 8 returning starters who kind of know how they're going to play together. They've got a whole year of tape under their belt. That's a plus. How can we put them in the best situations to be successful? I think if Ohio State can do that early, figure out what they do really well, and then add on as the year goes on, I think they can be that team. And I really do look for them. I think the whole experience last year was a great experience for this football team. Tough losses in it to the end. Some things didn't work out. And again, it goes back to just the standard in that building. I think there's enough heads in there, and I think they really do come out and put it together and they make a run at it.
Yeah, I'll disagree with Jake here. I think that they could have a top 20 to top 30 defense and they could still win a national title if their offense remains healthy through the year. I just think there's too much firepower. We see what this game is nowadays too, where, it's really about scoring and runs. It's almost like basketball to a certain extent when it comes to that. But I'll be curious to see how this thing shapes up.
the other thing too is if you're gonna be that run and gun, risk reward, confuse guys, you gotta take advantage of turning the ball over in some short fields, and it could play into their run and gun offensive mentality as well. So I think it's just we got to see what happens, and I think that Notre Dame matchup's going to be interesting too, with Notre Dame kind of shaking some things up. I know it was an internal promotion, but I think it's going to be a little different, and I'm excited to see how Ohio State comes in prepared for that.
Yeah, I mean, storylines for that Notre Dame game, too. You've got Marcus Freeman, who's a great linebacker at Ohio State, who's on that staff. You got their defensive line coach, Al Washington, who was on Ohio State's staff last year. He was a coach at Michigan. Jake is familiar with his work. You got Brian Mason, who was a GA at Ohio State, worked directly with the linebackers when I was there as a special teams coordinator. And a guy named James Laurinaitis, who was an All-American, really good player in the NFL.
Just a guy.
Defensive staff as well. So a lot of Ohio State connections and some pretty damn good coaches too. But I want to switch it over to Michigan, the team that we should be talking about because they are defending Big Ten champs. They made it to the college football playoff. This is a team last year that exceeded expectations for a lot of people. I didn't think that they were going to be able to get over the hump, and that's not just my Ohio State bias. I wasn't sure if that team was going to be able to galvanize the way that they did, and they made a huge splash. I think a big part of that, and Hack, me and you talked about this a lot last year, Cade McNamara took a lot of crap because he's not that explosive quarterback. He's never going to be all world, but he was a guy who knew how to manage the game. He made the right passes, didn't get sacked a ton, didn't turn the football over. They were able to hand the ball off, something that we talked about that Ohio State couldn't do with consistency. And defensively, they played really well. But now you're coming into this season, and there's a question of, do we go with Cade or do we go with J.J. McCarthy, the young explosive quarterback who we saw in spurts last year, made some really good plays, but also had some young mistakes. When you look at the running back room, Hassan Haskins was really good. He's gone, but you got Corum coming back. You got Donovan Edwards, who I think is going to be a really good addition there. Offensive line. Lost some pieces right there, but you get some guys healthy at wide receiver, and then you flip it over to defense. New coordinator on that side of the football. No Aiden Hutchinson, no David Ajabo, no Chris Hinton, no Josh Ross, no Dax Hill. Bunch of really good players for him. This Michigan team has some questions coming into this season. Jake, I'll ask this to you, and I'm very curious to get your authentic response. Was 2021 a fluke for the Michigan Wolverines?
I don't think it was a fluke. I thought it was kind of a turning point where, Jim going into that season after the COVID season, a lot of people wanted Jim to be fired, Michigan fans included. Mostly Michigan fans wanted him to be gone. They wanted to start fresh. And with his back against the wall, there was a fork in the road. Jim made some big time decisions. He went a lot younger with the staff, guys that were, where he was typically older NFL guys, more experienced guys. He went younger that were able to communicate with the players. Even the way he carried himself, the way he communicated with his assistant coaches and the players, it felt like the team kind of took a tough situation where they adopted this us against the world mindset, and it really paid dividends for them down the stretch. And the key word is getting the monkey off the back. I talked to some of the guys, and, even you always believe you could beat Ohio State, but going into the game, it's like, hey, man, we actually have to do it to fully believe it. And they said now that they beat them this past season, that they feel confident, hey, listen, David's finally slayed Goliath. We can beat these guys. Offensively, they have a bunch of talent. The quarterback battle, they can't go wrong with either guy. You have two great running backs. You return 3 offensive linemen, and you go out and get a Remington Award finalists in Olu Oluwatimi at center. Yep. So they feel great about the offensive line. I think they have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country in Sharon Moore. This might be their most talented receiver room they've had in a very, very long time. But again, I think it comes down to the coordinators too. Is Josh Gaddis, he had his best season as a coordinator last year, but he had been the Michigan coordinator for a few years. It took him a couple years of calling plays to kind of find his rhythm and find his identity.
Let me jump in on that real quick, because the rhythm and identity thing I believe is really interesting. And Hack, you spent some time around Gaddis, yep. I believe.
He was our receivers coach.
Good. He's a guy who I felt like philosophically was a little bit at odds with what Jim Harbaugh likes to be, where Josh Gaddis talked about being a little bit more wide open and trying to get athletes in space a little bit more. And Jim Harbaugh's a guy who I think is perfectly content with winning the game in a phone booth, which is totally fine because it is effective. Do you think that them having more of a collaboration, because I think we saw a little bit of both of it last year, was one of the turning points that program had?
Oh yeah. I felt that's a great point and a great observation is, Jim had so much success doing it his way. And, I think Gaddis was finally compromised with Jim, where it's like, hey, we're going to run the ball, but let's modernize that. And you saw that with more jet sweeps, wide receiver motions. It wasn't just power offense out of 22 or 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends or, a tight end and a fullback. They were able to get into 11 personnel with extra receivers or just stay in 12 personnel with the threat of a pass and have a number of different ways to beat you in the running game. So it was a combination of the best of both worlds. And again, that kind of speaks to the changing temperament of Jim, where, he allowed, he did do that dance where he wanted to have it his way because he know it works, but he allowed and listened to his coaches so they could come to the best solution for everybody.
Hack, I got a 2-point question for you here. The first one is, if you're a quarterback who's in the midst of a battle, what is your mentality like? How are you trying to not only put your best out on the field every day, but win the locker room as well? Is the first question. The second one is, if you're sitting there and you're calling this offense and you get the final call on who should be the starter this year, based off of what you've seen, who do you think they should go with?
Well, that's interesting because I think it ties into the first question of last year being a fluke or not. I'm not going to say last year was a fluke. I just think it was a perfect storm of a lot of compromise and a lot of the right pieces, right? I think Cade, if they can run the football as effectively as they did last year, I think Cade's perfectly fine. And I don't know how you bench a guy who won consistently like that, no matter what the situation is. You know what I mean? I think you still have to roll him out there and see what happens. But again, there's been so many different circumstances that have changed that's going to be a really interesting one to peg on. And I would argue that although last year was a huge year for Jim Harbaugh, I think this year is even bigger because of all of that change and all of that influx, because he did set the standard now. And at a place like Michigan, when you set that standard, you have to carry it on. It's just like any of the other schools that we played at as well. When you set a certain standard at that place and you raise the expectation to where it has been, that's where it is. To answer your question about a quarterback battle, I really think that winning the locker room and performance on the field work hand in hand. At the end of the day, all those guys are going to look at you. And if you're a guy who knows what you're doing, can operate, can move the ball up and down the field, can correct guys when they need questions asked in the huddle, things of that nature, just taking ownership of the entire operation. I think that's invaluable. And I think that's one of the things where if I'm evaluating the situation, it is really hard to bench a guy like Cade McNamara, who's been doing that and did it at a high level. To your point though, JJ's got a ton of God-given talent, and he got a lot of opportunities last year, relatively speaking, for a young guy in that type of situation. So it's going to be really interesting to see. And that's why I said, I think how Jim Harbaugh handles all of this is going to tell a lot moving forward as to his longevity at Michigan and the direction of the program moving forward.
The big year comment really stands out to me because I certainly agree with that. And part of the context of that too is Jim Harbaugh has his best year at Michigan and then flirts with going to the NFL. And you have to come back in and you have to face your locker room. And I know that he's a guy who could do that 100% because the speech when you walk back in, if you're Jim Harbaugh, is, hey, I'm here for you guys. I think you guys understand what we were up against situationally. And now I'm back and I want enthusiasm unknown to mankind. And I know that the guys really are bought into that.
Let's be honest, though. Let's be honest, though.
Let's talk about
it. Dude took a pay cut.
Yes.
Took a pay cut to 100%. Stay there. And then he went out and won. So you gotta think there was a little bit of politics being played with that NFL move.
Oh yeah.
It probably was, but these cats are the players are business people too. We got NIL going on. They understand.
They should understand that.
They should. And so that's why he should be able to walk back in and say, listen, I thought about making a business move. Didn't work out in that regard, but I'm here and I want to repeat what we did last year. And if I'm a player and I'm mature enough, I can understand that. If you got some immature guys, then you gotta massage that a little bit. But the grown men in the locker room are going to understand. And if they want to play in the league, they got to get used to that too, because that happens all the time.
Talking to the guys in the locker room, man, I don't think, it was a big story when it was a big story, but man, so much time has passed. They went and had their ceremony. They handed out their Big Ten rings. They hugged Jim Harbaugh. After that, man, it's behind them, So it's kind of yesterday's news.
It's a good
Winning
point.
cures all sickness.
Yeah, it's
listen,
a good point, but my boy wanted to get some of that payroll
I'm sure
back.
you want to get the
Leverage.
cheddar. Look, I want to
You're
get the
thinking
money
some
too.
some leverage.
My guy needed some of that payroll back.
I
It
mean,
hurt their recruiting. At one point,
look,
they had the worst recruiting class in the Big Ten going into the
but
is
summer
that a big
draft.
deal
his
anymore?
classes are always a slow build, though. I feel like
They are,
that's typical.
but they should not have the worst recruiting class in the Big Ten after beating Ohio State, and they're coming back
They're
up.
choosy.
But to me,
They're
it
choosy.
was a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
But
You
is
know?
that a big
But
deal
it-
anymore? Is that
What?
a big deal anymore?
With the
Recruiting
transfer
classes.
portal, because you can go to the
Is it a
transfer
big deal
portal
anymore?
It's a good point. It's a good point.
I don't
Good
think it's a
point.
big deal anymore. If you
Yeah.
can go out there and just hand pick stuff, I mean, shoot, I'm coaching high school ball now, man. It's hard to get kids a look.
Yeah.
You're seeing guys who are like, I'm just going to keep a relationship with this guy.
Right.
And if he doesn't go play, or
Right.
doesn't get paid enough, hey, this is how it's going to work. So that's another dynamic, man. And you saw Mel Tucker do that to
he
a
did.
T last year.
Yeah.
He did. And
Yeah.
we'll talk about them coming up here on the show. Before we get off of Michigan, though, we got to talk defense. Again, this is a unit that I had a ton of respect for a year ago. And I ran through the names of the guys that were a part of that defense and just the way that they continued to build throughout the year, the way that they got the big plays exactly when they needed them, the way that they bowed up in the face of some really good offenses stood out to me. But you lose a lot of the guys that were out there really leading the charge on that defense, not only production-wise, but leadership-wise. I mentioned a guy named Josh Ross. And I think that he was one of the most dependable leaders in the Big Ten Conference a year ago. You also lose Mike McDonald, and he worked some magic on that Michigan defense. He was absolutely phenomenal, right guy at the right time. As in that locker room, how are they going to reconcile with the losses that they had on the defensive side of the ball?
The leadership is a point that doesn't get talked about enough, because Aiden Hutchinson was a captain. He was your vocal leader. After they lost the Michigan State game, that was a big point in the season. He called everybody into the locker room after Monday practice and got them refocused and squared away. Because I know Michigan fans, the media, everyone was saying, oh, here we go again. The leadership was huge. Josh Ross, leader. Daxton Hill, secondary. He was a leader. Mike McDonald, obviously such a good leader. The Ravens want him back as they're trying to run for a Super Bowl. So the leadership is a big piece. They're saying Mozzie Smith is a guy that's stepping up. But, just listening to the comments throughout the program, they feel as though this year the defense, the scheme as a whole is going to shine, rather than saying, hey, we're going to have Hutch and Ojabo come up off the edge, disrupt guys. We're going to be able to get more into that Baltimore Ravens scheme where there is some more exotic blitzes and coverages. And that's going to allow us all 11 guys to play unit-wide defense. And that's what's going to shine through this year.
Right.
We'll see. I mean, I think I think you make a great point, but when it's hard when you set a standard of leadership and those guys are now gone and you don't know how it's necessarily going to reverberate throughout the rest of the locker room. Right. Yeah. And I think when you have so many passionate leaders that in terms of setting a standard, again, it goes back to the question mark of does that message continue to reverberate within that locker room? Did it stay there? And are guys going to take advantage of that and continue it moving forward? And that's why I said, I think this year, for me, if I'm looking at Jim Harbaugh, I think this year is his biggest year, top to bottom, how he handles everything, because he has so much good going for him, but he also has a lot of question marks that he needs to get answered. And the only way you answer that is by running the ship and driving it in the right direction.
They have a favorable schedule this year, though, Josh.
They do.
Yeah.
They have a and the out of conference lines up where you're trying to figure out your identity and your new leaders. It sets up very, very favorable schedule. Penn State, Michigan State at home, favorable crossover games.
It sets up. I totally agree with you on that. I think that they've got every opportunity to work out whatever issues may exist early on in the year. You mentioned some of the home games against some of the teams in the East that we think are going to be competitors. It certainly sets up for them. And I'll be curious to see, too. I'm with Hack. I'm in wait and see mode. I'm actually going to watch them practice tomorrow. Don't know how much we're going to get because it seems like it's going to be a quick practice. But I'm curious to be informed about what they've got going there. Before we move on, if you like what you're hearing, or even if you don't like what you're hearing, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. But I wanted to get into some of the sleepers. In this conference, we know what the East powers are like. But we got some teams that are lurking. Over in the West, it's wide ass open. And we're going to talk about some of the battles that may go on because I know we got some thoughts about the West here. But starting off in the East, Hack, it's your time. I mean, is Penn State, are they going to return to form as that team in the East that can challenge Ohio State, that team in the East that's going to get a win over Michigan and put themselves in position? Or do you see some of the same issues that we've seen in the last couple of years that might pop up again?
Listen, I think they were there even before Michigan showed their head up until last year. I think they were there, right? But I think, again, and I've beat this horse and we talked about it before we came on air here, it's last year they could not run the football, and the minute Cliff went down, all of the gadgety kind of like one-off game plans that came into it just didn't work out because you didn't have a guy pulling the trigger who was super comfortable with that and obviously didn't have a ton of reps at it, right? So that's a big point. I think they got some depth at that position now. I think that shores some things up. I think Cliff's very confident and obviously, has some stuff to build on this year. I thought they did a decent job in the transfer portal. I think their receiver room has the ability to not take a step down after losing Dotson. I love the Mitchell Tinsley kid. I think he's going to be really good.
Parker Washington's
he's a great player, and I just the way he's matured. So I think there's things that play into their schedule, or that play into their ability to do it. But I think it's going to ultimately fall on the coaching staff. They gotta figure out a way how to put these guys in situations to be successful, create an identity, and run with it throughout the year. Defensively, I thought Manny Diaz was a great add. I think he's a great football mind. I think they have some returners there that are gonna be able to adjust to that change. But ultimately, I'm still like with Penn State. I'm still in a wait and see, and I think that the one thing that's been missing there for a really long time has been the ability to turn around and hand the football off, with the exception of Saquon, who's a once in a generation talent. At the end of the day, when you cut through all the BS, he is. You got to be able to run the football. And at a place like Penn State, you definitely have to be able to run the football with the history that comes into that. So that's what I want to see. I want to see them be able to turn around, take some pressure off Cliff, and just let him operate off of play action and in a veteran type of role where he can make some explosives without as much pressure.
That run game is a legit problem. I want to read this stat to you. Penn State, second to last in the Big Ten in average per carry. The last team was Purdue, and we know that they don't even attempt to run the football. Right. So that's a really tough spot to be in. Their longest touchdown run, Penn State, last season was 7 yards. That's a staggering number when you really start to think about it, and especially a program like Penn State. They just have not been able to get that O-line together. Jake, is a guy who evaluates offensive football. You came from a tough and rugged type of system. Outside of just having better players, how do you build an offensive line so they can go out there and create the gaps when they need to run the football?
Yeah, I think another factor outside of running the ball is Sean Clifford's been great when he's been healthy, keeping him on his feet and clean in the pocket is only going to benefit him. I mean, this starts with, one good thing to consider here is Clifford mentioned he had 4 offensive coordinators in 6 years. So again, when you're having turnover, you're essentially learning a new language. So those offensive linemen, rather than emphasize your technique within the scheme, you're learning a new language so you can talk about your calls, how to identify the defense, getting everybody on the same page. So having the return of the same coordinator, that should benefit them right off the jump, where now they can focus on their technique. But, getting 5 guys to play as one unit and getting the tight ends involved. For the most part, when you have a one-on-one matchup, you don't necessarily need to knock somebody off the ball all of the time. It's when you have the double teams, when you have 600 pounds on 300 pounds, can you then generate movement? And how you do that is you have to, it's pee-wee football. It's shoulder to shoulder. It's hip to hip. It's pad level. It's getting the guy lifted up and back on his heels, and then you drive your feet and generate movement. So I think foundationally, it starts with the fact that you have an offensive coordinator back for the same year. They should be able to, work on the technique rather than the new language. That should benefit them just from the jump right away.
Yeah, and Hack, you mentioned their defense. I think their defense is going to be really good. You got Joey Porter Jr., who could be a first-round pick. Jair Brown was probably one of the players on defense in the conference we didn't talk enough about last year. And P.J. Mustipher being healthy, I think is bigger probably for leadership than it is on the X's and O's standpoint. But we saw that their defense took a step back last year when he got hurt. I want to move on to Michigan State. That was a team that was really boomer bust defensively last year. They had the most TFLs and most sacks in the conference, or second most TFLs, excuse me, but they had the worst pass defense and the worst total defense in the Big Ten because they let up so many big plays. But you got Peyton Thorne back, you got Jaden Reed, who's a guy who I think is going to be one of the top playmakers at wide receiver in the conference. Certainly, Kenneth Walker is not walking through that door. That's a pretty big deal. Can they replicate another 11-win season? Simple question.
It's concerning. When I was looking at them, I said, hey, there's a lot more room for a step back than there is a step forward. And, losing Kenneth Walker was such a big part of their offense. But again, it's not sexy to talk about this, but the offensive line is a concern for me, because not only do you have to replace the talent at running back, but do you have the guys up front to generate movement and create holes? They finished spring ball with 8 guys. They couldn't have a spring game because they didn't even have the depth to have 2 teams. So not only that, do you have 5 guys that you feel confident can be a beast and can start and help you out across the offensive line? So there's a depth issue, there's a talent issue. And, for Peyton Thorne, can he take the step forward? Well, he's going to need guys up front to protect him so he can get the ball to all of his weapons. So that's just something I'm considering. I think their offensive line play is going to dictate their ceiling this fall.
Yeah, I think 11 wins is a stretch. They're going to have the ball bounce their way on quite a few occasions. And as we all know, we've seen crazier stuff happen. I mean, Iowa was ranked number 2 in the country at one point last year. So we've seen crazier stuff happen. But to your point, Jake, I just don't see it with what they lost and what they need to fix and what they need to compensate for. I don't see it on that roster.
All right. I want to get this one in real quick, and it's probably not going to be a quick conversation because I think all of us like this team right now. Maryland is a really interesting case. Made a change at defensive coordinator for their last 2 games, took a big step forward, but it's really the offense that's the story. You got Leah Tungavailoa, who I think is probably the most underrated quarterback returning in all of college football right now. At his high end, the dude is phenomenal. We've seen him at his low end. It's not good football, but if he can remain even keeled mentally and emotionally, I think he can take that step. And then you've got Dante Demas Jr., you got Rakim Jarrett, you've got Jayshon Jones at the wide receiver spot. Is Maryland in a window where they can compete a little bit?
So the thing for Maryland is I'm looking at their schedule right here. I see 6 wins. I can give them 6 wins off the top. I think that they'll be playing in a bowl game. The key for Maryland is they're 4-40 all time, Josh, against the Big Four in the Big Ten East, which is Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State. They've really struggled. Now, they've scared those teams. And, anytime you have an explosive offense, you can compete. But I think program change happens in small steps. So now you have to go from scaring some of these teams. Can you steal at least 1, maybe 2 of those games away from one of the Big Four? I think that would be a sign. And I think they have the quarterback to do it. They have the talent on offense. A couple balls are going to have to go their way and they're going to have to be on their A game. But that's how they're going to measure their success this year. Can they steal away 1 or 2 of the games from the Big Four there in the Big Ten East?
Okay, so that is actually a good point that you make, because last year they beat all the teams they're supposed to beat, but you look at their losses: Iowa, Ohio State, Minnesota, Penn State, Michigan State, and Michigan. Like, they literally didn't beat the teams that they needed to pull an upset on. And they made it to a bowl game. They won their bowl game, but I think key for them is probably going to be where they can steal a couple of wins this season. Hack, as you evaluate this offense, I mean, what's the top end? Where can they be by the end of the year?
I mean, I think they're very explosive. And when you're talking about top end, who knows what that is? Stay healthy. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But I think their offense, to Jake's point, puts them in situations to be successful. But ultimately, I think you make a great point. Like, what's the definition of compete for Maryland right now? When you look at the entirety of the program, like, what's the definition of compete? And I think getting on a consistent run of bowl game appearances and then starting to not just scare some of these bigger teams in the East because of how dominant this side of the conference is, you got to steal them. And, I'm going to keep beating a dead horse with some of these points because I think you guys covered it pretty well. But I think they need to start to see that happen more consistently for them to really be a riser within the conference. And they have some things that are working against them. You know, their backyard gets plucked by every single one of the big four in that side of the conference.
Yep.
So, you know, you got to start keeping some talent at home, and there's a lot of things that go into it. But, you know, it's just the definition. And I look forward to seeing how explosive the offense is. It'll be fun to watch, but I think it's going to be tough for them to emerge with everything that's going on in that side of the conference.
Yeah, they're going to be a team that benefits when the Big Ten goes away from divisions, certainly, because it's really rough for them right now. And to your point about talent, I think that there are enough guys in their backyard at skill positions that they can be successful. The hard thing is maintaining the lines of scrimmage, because those guys are certainly getting plucked out.
Yes.
And I don't think that there are a lot of great guys up front just heading into college. A lot of those guys are developmental in the first place. Again, this is the Field 12 After Dark Big Ten preview show presented by Bet Rivers. Like and subscribe on YouTube if you're enjoying what you're seeing. Let's get over to the Big Ten West. I got to say, guys, a lot of people, they're on the Iowa, they're on the Wisconsin. I think this is a great opportunity for the Minnesotas and the Purdues of the world to go ahead and win that division. Saw Minnesota practice. Is one of the best coached teams in the conference. People really buy into that row the boat mentality there. They've got great running back room. They've got a defense that nobody's talking about that was quietly one of the best defenses in the Big Ten last year. And you look at Purdue, second best quarterback in the conference coming in my humble opinion. That offense racks up yards like crazy, and they took a step forward on defense. George Karlaftis is not coming back. However, I think that they broke through a mental wall. As I look at it, if I'm putting money on teams over in the West, my money's going on Minnesota and Purdue before it's going on Wisconsin and Iowa. Fellas, where are you guys at?
Listen, I called the Minnesota spring game this year too, and I knew that Minnesota's always been a solid team. But as you looked at it, I thought Iowa was going to take a step back. I thought Wisconsin, just Graham Mertz, he just hasn't evolved into somebody that gives you much confidence. I feel their ceiling's capped with him at quarterback. And then it was like, all right, Tanner Morgan, he's been up, he's been down. He had a great season in 19, not so much the past 2 years. What was the difference? What was their offensive coordinator, Kirk Ciarrocca? When he was there in 2019, they had one of the best offenses in school history. Now he's back again this year with Tanner Morgan being in his 6th year. He's a veteran guy. They got a great relationship. Last year, they dealt with a lot of tragedies. There was deaths. There was off the field tragedies. It was a tough year for their offense. But I expect them to be significantly improved. And looking at the spring game, they're going to get back to that modern RPO style, which is a lot easier and a lot more favorable for Tanner Morgan. And you said it, Joe Rossi has done a great job with their defense. Their back end, they feel, could be the best in the entire Big Ten. The safety position's locked down, and then they went to the transfer portal. They got 2 guys that really flashed in Beanie Bishop and Ryan Stapp. Those guys flash. So that's it. That's a team no one's talking about, and that's probably good. I'd be buying some stock in Minnesota this year. Probably how they like it.
They 2019, they had the 3rd or 4th pass efficiency offense in the nation. With Kirk Ciarrocca calling plays, and Tanner Morgan was very decisive that year, and that certainly went away over the last couple of seasons. Hack, you're taking a look at the West. I mean, where are you leaning?
I think you talk about. I'll continue on the Minnesota thing. The player I'm most excited to see, and I think was one of the tragedies for that team last year on a lesser scale, was Mo Ibrahim going down in that Ohio State game, and I am very excited to see what that kid can do. I think one of the themes we've talked about is offensive line. Minnesota always has that. They have big guys that can create space. And when you have a guy with that type of talent, it's going to take pressure off Tanner Morgan. I think it's just going to help the entire situation. I absolutely love Aiden O'Connell at Purdue. I've talked about it over and over again. I think the kid is one of the most pro-ready guys in the country in terms of accuracy, anticipation, timing, ability to move. But he's not a 4-4, 4-5 guy, but he moves inside of the pocket in ways that are almost Brady-esque in terms of slight movements to create that last half second to be able to deliver the football, where most guys would be bailing, getting the hell out of there. I'm a big fan of Aiden O'Connell. I think Purdue's got a shot, and I'm going to kind of throw a curveball here because of all the pressure and everything that's going on. But I think one thing you and I talked about, Josh, was Nebraska and their defense last year. And I think they did a decent job in the portal. I think they may have some answers at quarterback. And I think I'm not buying stock in them. I'm just saying I think it's one of those situations where it could work out for them with all of those things considered. I thought that they were roster-wise not lacking talent last year. It was just consistently shooting themselves in the foot. I think a year of going through that, you're either going to make a change or you're going to go down with the ship. And I hope Scott Frost over there understands the importance of that. And I think he's done a decent job up until this point. I think adding Mark Whipple's a big add from coming from Pitt with Kenny Pickett. Yep. So we will see. I think that's kind of my one of the teams that I'm not buying stock in, but who knows? We'll see what happens.
All right. So let's move on to that conversation here on the Field of 12 After Dark, presented by Bet Rivers. We want to talk about Scott Frost because I think you're right. This is a situation that certainly is tenuous, but the talent is there. And we talked about it last year, Hack. I agree with you 100%. It was never a roster issue with them. And even Adrian Martinez, who was much maligned by the fan base, that guy gave everything he had. And did he turn the football over a little bit too much? Absolutely. Was that a guy that you would want in your locker room? 100%, because it's a guy who gave you everything that he had. Defensively, I thought that, yes. Yeah. And defensively, I thought they were solid. And you got Garrett Nelson coming back. He's going to be one of the best defensive linemen in the conference. Luke Reimer came in at linebacker as a walk-on, finished with over 100 tackles a year ago. He's earned himself a scholarship in the few years that he's been at Nebraska. They were plus 63 scoring margin on the season and only won 3 games. Yeah. All of their 9 losses came by single digits. And those were to teams like Oklahoma, Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State. The best 3-win team I've ever seen in the history of college football. I've only been around for 28 years, but by damn it seemed like they had all the pieces in place. I mean, how much pressure is on Scott Frost, and where do you draw the line on how you define success for this Nebraska team this upcoming season?
So, Josh, when we talk about the fact that they, had a positive scoring differential but only won 3 games, just as a side note, my first year at Michigan, we were 7-6, and in those 6 losses, they were close games. I think it was 6 losses by a total of like 11. Most of those losses were by a total of like 11 or 12 points. Barring the outside of the Michigan State game. We came back the next year and we're 5-7. So it doesn't necessarily mean much. And, one concern for me, I think the pressure is on Scott Frost. Like, this is kind of do or die. It's one of those situations where, your back's against the wall. If you don't succeed or perform this year, you're out. We saw how that actually benefited Harbaugh this year because you kind of take the leap and you let it all out. There's no room to be uptight. You got nothing to lose. Let's go. One concern for me is the special teams last year. Yeah, the special teams significantly cost them games. And Josh, maybe you could talk about this. What does it say about your team as a whole from a discipline standpoint and a culture standpoint if you have poor special teams? Maybe you could run with that.
Yeah, no, I was a guy who played on teams my 4 years at Ohio State, and I made my money in the NFL basically covering kicks, and it's an integral part of the game. And one of the things that people talk about, if I had to rank football in terms of importance, I think possessing the football is the most important thing in football, NFL or college. And that's why I personally believe that more coaches should go for it on 4th and short situations, regardless of field position. I think possession of the football is key. But the next thing that comes into play is that field position battle. And people talk about those hidden yards in games. And I think it is really important, number one, to be able to take advantage of those hidden yards. You, as a defender, if I have a team backed up, that makes me feel better than if I got a team that's in midfield, because I know that the percentage of them scoring points is going to be significantly less if they have to travel more yards, right? So just from a mentality standpoint, I can play looser, I can be more aggressive, and I think that's key. But the other thing about special teams is those are the few plays where you know what the outcome is going to be regardless. Is I kick the ball, the other team gets the ball. I know what's going to happen unless I have a stupid penalty and I mess that whole thing up. And that messes with the psyche of a football team. And so as much as guys don't want to play on teams, or as much as guys don't want to put the effort in on teams, it is an integral part of the game because it's a fraction of what you do, but it has such an impact on the outcome of football games. So to me, that's a program that needs to be spending a lot of time on special teams. And it's not just on the practice field, but you need to do the walkthroughs. And then when you get into the meeting room, let's go over what special teams should actually look like. Like, let's break it down. We'll play good clips of special teams. We'll talk about what the anticipated outcomes should be. And then we'll talk about what the importance of the outcomes are. Because if I can dictate the tempo there, I automatically have an edge. And that is something they certainly did not have last year. And it bit them in the ass more than once and in some really critical situations.
You guys had starters playing special teams at Ohio State last year. Michigan had starters. Alabama had starters. You got to put your ego aside and say, if I want to win a game, I have to participate on special teams. Maybe if you're a starter, you don't need to play all four, but at least
you got to be covering punts or something.
Yeah.
But to your point though, Josh, the outcome's known, and I think it's also one of the easiest segments of the game to change because ultimately it's discipline and effort. Yes. When you're talking about special teams, it's discipline and effort, right?
Yep.
I say that's easy to change. It can be hard, but it is, in my opinion, probably the easiest thing to change. If you're trying to make a cataclysmic change to one of your teams or one of your units, I think it's one of the easiest things to do. So, you know, I don't think Scott, he's been around the game. He's a smart guy. I think he's looked at it enough. But I think the teams, I think they got it. And if they can put some stuff together, it's a wide open West. We've always talked about that, the way they've structured it. And, you know, I think Wisconsin's gotten really comfortable up there. And to your point, Jake, I mean, I don't know what Graham's got. So do or die, let the nuts hang, let the fucker fly, man. Let the fucker fly, dude. So I think you're going to see that.
And that's kind of why I asked you that, Josh, is what does it mean when you have 4 special teams? And it does come down to discipline and effort. And for Scott Frost, when you say how important is this year? Well, this is extremely important because, you know, I don't think he has a job here at Nebraska if he doesn't go out there and succeed.
It'll be tough. And I think that you can grade Nebraska's success on more than just wins and losses as well, because we're having this conversation. But do you turn the football over less? Do you have better special teams plays? Can you eliminate some of the stupid penalties that got you in some bad situations a year ago? So to me, even if you make a bowl game, if you're still playing sloppy ball, did you really achieve what you set out to do at the beginning of the year?
And another point too is what you got to think about is, where does Nebraska go from here? Is Nebraska any longer a destination spot?
It's not.
You have your prodigal son. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, man. Like, I think Scott's got some stuff and he's got some leverage, but I think if Nebraska fires Scott Frost after this year and there's no improvements, I think you lose Nebraska in terms of the landscape of college football.
I think that is a very good conversation for a different day, because I got some strong opinions on that. Certainly not a destination. And you're probably looking at hiring one of those young whiz kid coordinators, because I'm not exactly sure you're going to get that head coach who's done a really good job, even at a small school, to take a leap of faith at Nebraska right now, which is a tough situation. But we're going to cut out your boy Shiano. Hack, I'm sorry to do it, and I love him too, but we got to get this show rolling a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the marquee positions in this league. Is this more of a quarterback league or a running back league? So let me give you some names here. You got CJ Stroud, obviously we talked about him. Aiden O'Connell, who we all like and respect. Leah Tungavailoa has been a point of conversation. You got Peyton Thorne, you got Sean Clifford as some of the veteran guys, but then you flip it to running back. You got Braylon Allen, who in my opinion is the best running back in this conference at this point. Best contact balance, best vision, especially as a guy who came in at 17. It was tearing it up last year. Blake Corum is a guy who we're going to talk about a lot throughout the season. You got Travion Henderson, who we've given a lot of love to. Mo Ibrahim is healthy, going to get 30 carries a freaking game. He's a high volume back. You've got Nick Singleton, the young guy at Penn State. And you got Chase Brown over there at Illinois. I mean, the high end of the quarterbacks is ridiculous in this conference, but we got the depth of the running backs and some really high end guys too. All right, if you're picking positions, where are you leaning on, the quarterback or the running back?
I don't want to defer to the quarterback on this one. Hack, you want to lead it?
I think it's an interesting conversation in the Big Ten, right? I think when you talk about the Big Ten historically, it's been more of a running back, offensive line, defensive driven league when you're talking about talent. But I think Ohio State's really done a great job of turning that corner. And I think the direction of college football in general has started turning that corner. And at the end of the day, top to bottom, high school to the NFL, everything's a quarterback driven business. It's what it is. So when you're talking about competitors and you're talking about teams that can make noise, I think you need a trigger man. You can no longer have a subpar quarterback
Agreed.
and an elite running back and win football games. You need a quarterback who can compensate it. And we talked about it too, talent wise, maybe Cade McNamara isn't on this list, but execution and the bigger picture of the position, I think Cade McNamara could make this list as well in terms of knowing his strengths, knowing the strengths of his team and his offense, and then doing his job play in, play out. That's how Brady's made his money. He doesn't do anything spectacular. He just does the monotonous, boring stuff exceptionally well.
Yeah.
And you can do it. So I think it's a quarterback driven league. And I think that's the answer across the board.
Man, and I would try to tell this to Michigan fans last year is there is so much to the quarterback position besides arm talent, and Cade wasn't asked to do much in the passing game last year. Michigan State, he was. And what did he do in that game? He had an
400 yards
game. Exactly.
You and I talked about that, Josh.
We did. We actually called that performance. That was something that we had anticipated was going to happen. And I think people who were reading the tea leaves of what Michigan's season was going to look like and also where college football was headed knew that that was a capability there. But I think you're bringing up something really important, Jake, is that the quarterback position is much more than all the flash that we see at the top end. These cats got to perform regardless of what they see out there from the defense.
Yeah. And it's kind of varies. It depends on the team too, because in today's college football, the coordinators are making a lot of the calls and they're looking over to the sideline and it's up tempo. The coordinators are doing a lot of the pre-snap stuff. But what you would notice with Cade last year, and I can speak on them specifically just because I watched so much of them in understanding Harbaugh's offense, there's so much that goes on pre-snap. You get the play in your headset. You then have to remember the play and speak it to your huddle. Your huddle then goes up to the offensive line. You might have shifts and motions that you have to remember. All the while you're trying to dissect the pre-snap look of the defense. Okay, now you see pressure coming. Well, typically your offensive line is going to one side or the other. You have to potentially flip protection. Again, still maintaining and remembering the play. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 plays called in the huddle, and you're going to have to audible.
And all that in 25 seconds.
25 seconds, and then you have to do it efficiently. Then you have, and I'm speaking, Hack, you can touch on this way more than me. Then you have to go back and execute your technique and throw an accurate football on time to a receiver that's in the right place at the right time and catches it. The mental aspect of the quarterback position, I don't know. What percentage would you put it at, Hack? 80?
Dude, I argue this all the time. I think the quarterback position is the most dependent position in sports because of what you say in terms of the mental side and preparation and execution and being able to do it consistently at a high level. But then the fact that we talked about it earlier in this show, you are dependent on 10 other guys doing their job at the same level that you're thinking and processing. So there's so many things that go into playing that position. And to your point, I played in a very similar system under Bill O'Brien my true freshman year. It was get the play in, readjust the mic if you need to. Hell, if you got a better play, get into a different play. There's so many things that happen in a small time frame, and that's like when you can see the beauty in that in a guy like Cade McNamara, and that's why I saw it. I think the kid did a great job at just operating, and that's one of the things that gets overlooked because it's not sexy. It's not the 20 yard in cut or the deep post that's thrown on a rope. It's the not sexy part of the position that if you're actually watching, you're like, wow, you get a much greater appreciation for it.
I got a metric that I was thinking about. I'm interested to hear you guys' opinion to when a quarterback has matured. And I think it's how they use the snap count. If you watch Aaron Rodgers in the NFL, he rarely does he snap the ball with more than 5 or 6 seconds on the clock. And most people are saying, why? Well, he's trying to get the defense to show their hand, and he's so good at it. You watch Patrick Mahomes, go back to watch his rookie year when he played at the end of the season for Alex Smith and watch the way he manipulates the snap count now. Snap count to me says, you're trying to get the defense to show their hand and you believe in your preparation and your ability to get your offense in a pre-snap schematic advantage.
But again, going back to the most dependent position in sports, everybody else has to be ready for you to use the snap count. So it's very interesting, bro. Like, it's like you have to truly be prepared every single day. Practice, walkthroughs, everything. And you have to be thinking at those next level points. And that's why I think the quarterback's such an important and integral position in the sport. And it's going to be moving forward.
Get an asshole like me on the other side, and I see that clock going down. I'm timing up.
Blitz.
I'm trying to
I
jump on the snap too.
Right.
So you guys think you got all the damn answers, and you
Goes
don't.
both ways.
Let me give the case for the running backs real quick before we get into our power rankings, because it's interesting. I'm not going to disagree with you guys on the quarterbacks. I think all the things that you have to do at that position is really important. We've seen it executed even at the highest levels by guys who have different skill sets, where in the national championship, we saw a Heisman Trophy winner and Bryce Young go out there, and he was phenomenal the full year. And then on the other side, you get Stetson Bennett, who if you ask Georgia fans, they probably weren't even happy that he was freaking playing quarterback, and he wins you a title, right? And so there's 100 ways to skin a cat at that position, but you have to be really good at what you do, and you have to perform under all kinds of circumstances. But these running backs in this conference are really interesting. I mentioned all the names, but at Wisconsin, you've got Allen, and then you got Ches Malusi, who's a really good running back. And then at Michigan, you got Cormy, you got Donovan Edwards, who are two guys who I think are so versatile, they can give defenses a lot of problems. I hated playing against those guys because I don't know what the hell they're going to do. And I'm so worried about tackling them in the run game, and I got to go cover the son of a bitch. And he's a better athlete than I am. It's a tough spot to be in. Then you got Trevion Henderson, you got Mayan Williams backing him up. And then you go Mo Ibrahim. They got a bevy of running backs over there at Minnesota. You got Nick Singleton. They got some veteran guys over there at Penn State, some really good guys who are going to give you some good guards so they can figure out the offensive line. And then even at Illinois, they got a couple of bodies that you can roll in. And so to me, I think that the quarterback is certainly what drives the league, but these running backs give such an advantage to their offenses because you can be multiple. You can have guys with different skill sets, and you can give those guys a blow. I said Minnesota's going to give Mo Ibrahim 30 carries a game because that's just what he brings, and he's the type of guy who wants to do that. They don't have to if they really don't want to, because they got guys who they can roll in. I think that is a really important thing about what we're getting with these running backs here in the Big Ten. But it's what everybody's probably been waiting for. You want to hear our preseason thoughts so you can call us dummies at the end of the year when we have all this all messed up, because I think I know everything until I don't know anything.
But Northwestern goes on a hot streak run and wins the Big Ten West.
And they could do it because that's been their MO. You finish in the basement and then you win the West if you're Northwestern. That's what they like to do. So you certainly cannot count them out. But I'll let you guys go. Hack, start from the bottom to the top. Who do you have in your initial power rankings?
So worst to first, you're going to hate this, but I kind of did it in pods.
Of course you did. That's what you did last year. You're a big pods guy. That's what I do.
I'm a pods guy. I have pods. Right. So I got Indiana, Illinois, Rutgers, Northwestern in this like bottom pod.
In that order? Or just a
pod?
No,
not in that order. Okay. They're in a pod. They're floating in space.
All right, let's see this.
Indiana, Illinois, Rutgers, and Northwestern in my bottom pod.
That's my bottom four as well. But I think it's my bottom four.
I think at the end of the day, it's interchangeable. Football's football. You never know what could happen. To your point, Northwestern could get hot. Who knows, right? I just think it's right there. Those guys, when you're talking about evaluating everything, top to bottom, they're in my bottom pod. The middle pod.
I think at some point you're going to have to pick an order because we got to make a graphic to pump out on social media, and we can't do a pods graphic.
No, Dagan can do pods. He can do pods. It's just going to be like a little bubble graph.
He sent the message. I mean, he's telling me right now, you got to pick.
Dagan.
All right, we'll come back to you. Jake, you're prepared.
Okay. Yeah. Jake can go.
The Michigan man, of course, he's prepared. It's a real academic school.
I actually have those same teams, but my most confident is I think Illinois will be the best out of all of those teams. I think Brett Bielema is stable.
Well, that's not a lot of help.
Yeah, but can we
I have it. Okay, it goes. I have
Jesus,
Rutgers. Rutgers is at the bottom of the Big Ten.
Okay.
Indiana is 13th. Northwestern is 12th. I got Illinois at 11. And I'm confident Illinois out of those. I think they are interchangeable. That's my order. I think I'm confident
they'll be the best
coach
team out of the group. I can attest to that.
Who? Illinois?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Okay, cool. That gives me confidence. All right. And then you want me to keep going, Josh?
Of course.
Okay. So then at number 10, I actually had Nebraska. And I again, this is where it gets a little sticky. Sure. I think they have the chance to go a little bit higher, but I felt more confident that Maryland would have a better team than them this year. So I put Maryland at 9. I think Iowa takes a big step back, even though they're going to have a solid defense this year. I think part of the reason they had so much success is they led the nation in turnovers, which helped their offense. I don't know that you can lead the nation twice.
That's a really iffy thing because I do the same thing. I'm like, can they do it? Can they do it? And I'm a dumbass because when you look at the stats over the last 5 years, they have led FBS, and the second closest team to them, they have led by 10 turnovers in the last 5 years.
Okay.
And so I go back to the same thing. Can they do it? Can they do it? And somehow they do. But listen, your logic is not necessarily totally off. I don't disagree with the pick, but I'm just throwing it out there. They might be able to turn people over again.
So I saw a stat last year. I was prepping for a game, and I saw a stat last year that Iowa's defense had done something that no other team had done since the 2001 Miami Hurricanes. So the fact that we're associating the Hawkeye defense with the 0-1 Hurricanes is just mind-blowing to begin with. But okay, so I had Iowa at 8. Then I went Purdue at 7. And I feel the middle of this is so interchangeable. I think Purdue could go much higher, but I have them at 7. I went Penn State at 6. I went Minnesota at 5. I think Minnesota could win the West, but I did have Wisconsin just from a historical standpoint. Wisconsin at 4, and then
so you have Wisconsin over Penn State.
I have Wisconsin over Penn State just because
he's a Michigan guy.
All right. Now my bias is showing.
I'm kidding.
But I only say that because I think Penn State's playing in the East, so I had to rank like at some point I have to have a West team, in there. So
do you?
I do because you're playing within your side of the conference. It's going to affect your record at the end of the season. So, and the offensive line at Penn State scares me, man. It just scares
out of me too.
Rounding out the top 3, Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State. I have Ohio State because I need to see Michigan beat Ohio State and Columbus before I start saying the narrative's changing. But
all right, good for you.
I got.
It's an honest evaluation. I'll go. I've got at 14 Indiana, and I've had the advantage over you guys of having watched most of these teams practice. So I think it I don't want to say it's more informed because I could be totally wrong, but it's helped shape my opinions of these teams. Indiana's going to have some real problems this year. Then I have Northwestern. They're going to have some real problems this year. Rutgers, because I think that they're better coached than those other two teams. I'm not exactly sure that the talent is separated by that much. Then I have Nebraska at 11. And I put Nebraska there for multiple reasons. I think the psychological aspect of this thing is really difficult for them. I'm not exactly sure that they got all of their issues worked out either. So they're at 11. Illinois is at 10. Might be high for a lot of people. I think Brett's a great coach. I think DeVito coming in as a transfer is going to be big for them. They're going to run the football well. And I really do think that their defense has something cooking there. I think they still might be a couple steps away, but they're certainly improving. Then I have Iowa at 9. They got a real quarterback problem. Not exactly sure how they're going to be running the football. One thing I do know, their defense is going to be really good again, and they'll play special teams. Then I put Maryland. That offensive upside to me stands out. Then you got Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, again, a team that's going to have really good defense. They'll probably run the football as good as anybody in the Big Ten, but quarterback is going to be a huge question. And who they're throwing the damn ball to is a question for me as well. Then Penn State at 6. Penn State's got a high caliber of athlete. Again, their running back room is deep. I like Sean Clifford at quarterback, even though he's been up and down. And I think their defense has a chance to be really good, especially in the back end. They've got guys that you couldn't freaking build on Madden if you wanted to back there. Number 5, Michigan State. Big question mark. I haven't seen this team yet. Kind of playing off of what I saw last year, playing off of the Mel Tucker mentality, playing off the fact that their defense literally can't be worse than it was a year ago within the Big Ten. Then Minnesota at 4. Really well-coached football team. I think they got some pieces. I told you about that damn defense. Last year it was good. Nobody talked about it. Number 3 is Purdue because I like the quarterback play. I think that they have room to improve in the run game, and their defense took a big step forward. And then number 2, Michigan, number 1, Ohio State, and those are self-explanatory.
Wow. Fairly similar, enough parity though. That'll make it interesting.
The middle
Absolutely.
is a crapshoot, right?
Right.
So I think we all had that pod that's going to be kind of in the bottom, but then the middle, literally pick them out of a hat.
Yeah.
Like, what do you like? What don't you like?
Week 3, I would say once we hit conference play, we are going to know a lot about these teams. So I think we should we should come back week 3 and see where we were at and then re-rank them for the rest of the season.
Heck, we still got to get a ranking from you.
I think week 1 with Penn State Purdue is going to be a great test.
Sure.
To which but I'm saying within the conference
wise,
to see where each team is. Because I think when you look at Penn State, the roster's there from a talent standpoint, but is it there from a developmental standpoint and a scheme and situation standpoint from a play-to-play, snap-to-snap basis? Are they going to put the talent that they do have in the best situation possible over and over again? That's the biggest question mark that I've had with Penn State.
They got a tough schedule.
Oh, I know.
They got a tough schedule.
But, bro, everybody in the East has a tough schedule. I mean, whether it's home, away, like –
it's the crossovers that do you in if you're playing in the East.
Yeah, well, the Auburn one, but I mean they made out decent with that last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did. Let's see what Penn State's got crossover.
Yeah.
So we got Purdue out there. Northwestern should be a dub, and then you got Minnesota. Feels a little bit tough to me.
Sleep on Minnesota, man.
I'm not sleeping on Minnesota.
I'm not. Yeah.
All right.
No, not you guys, but the listeners. Don't sleep on Minnesota.
Can you give us a ranking so we can get out of here?
Yeah.
No, I'm sticking with my pods, man. David's just going to have to stick with you guys. I will say, just not to spoil it, I had Ohio State and Michigan as 1 and 2. So we're
okay.
There.
All right.
This is one thing we all know. You had them at 1 and 2. Congratulations.
I'm a wizard with that one, but I think there's a pick in there. We'll see what happens.
I thought this was a lot of fun, fellas. We should probably do this
pleasure,
again
guys.
Sometime soon. Again, like and subscribe if you liked it. If you didn't like it, still like and subscribe because we need the numbers. But this was the Field of 12 After Dark presented by Bet Rivers, the Big Ten preview show. We think we know a lot right now. We don't know a damn thing. So make sure you stay tuned throughout the season so we can eat crow or we can take a victory lap on all the things that we got right. But for Jake Butt and Christian Hackenberg, I am Joshua Perry, and we can't